Hey, wait just 1 minute before you hit that fast forward button. You should know something. There's bonus content that goes with this episode. If you'd like to get it, make sure you sign up on Patreon or Substack.
This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the beaches were copper, the pince-nez was golden, and the blaze was silver, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about the difference between Holmes's pipes? Or how often he smokes cigars versus cigarettes? Or what Egyptian cigarettes are like?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 433, On Stage and Off. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast, where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
Bert, are you on stage or off?
I'm at the last stage, and they told me when I got on this ride that the last stage was going to get to Garwood by 11:30, and we're late.
Well, you know that Wells Fargo man, he's just coming down my way.
Yeah, with my Montgomery Ward catalog.
Goodness, you know they could pack a whole house in those things.
Yeah, and
you could order a house,
they did.
Build it, yeah. The Amazon.
You know, the problem is I ordered a Montgomery Ward house once, but
yes.
I never opted for the mailbox option, so they couldn't deliver it.
That's a chicken and egg problem right there.
Those are very quantum mechanical. Did you ever think about that? What came first, the chicken or the egg? Thanks to quantum mechanics, it all depends on who observed what when.
What? When? No one says when. Just what?
Why? I wonder. Ovum pullus cessio. That's
well,
Latin
before we get people wondering what they tuned into, why don't we get ourselves started on this episode? Welcome to.
Aren't we done?
It is our. You wish. Well, this is our monthly Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the theorist episode, where we take a piece of scholarship and pick it apart. We share it with you. Uncover it. Perhaps it's something that isn't commonly found or commonly recognized, and we want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to consider it along with us. So, in this episode, we're taking a chapter. Literally, we're taking a chapter out of William S. Baring-Gould's book, Sherlock Holmes of Baker Street, A Life of the World's First Consulting Detective. And the chapter is called On Stage and Off in England and America, 1879 to 1881. Should be an interesting discussion. It's a short chapter, so well, and that's not to say our episode's going to be short, but, it leaves us less to work with this time. So should be fun. Reminding you that we do have ways to support the show. If you are of that mind, we would certainly appreciate it. You can do it on Patreon or on Substack for as little as $1 a month over on Patreon, which you can find us there at patreon.com/trifles. Also available at a link in our show notes. You can sign up, and you will not only get access to occasional bonus content like our Trifling Trifles, another episode of which is going to drop later this week, so stay tuned for that, but you'll also be automatically entered to win for a drawing that we do at the end of every month for a back issue of the Baker Street Journal. We send those out to help keep our listeners engaged and introduce you into the world of Sherlockian scholarship, just like we do in these episodes. And then we also have that option over on Substack. I believe the tariff there, you can pay at an annual rate, or at a monthly rate for as low as $5 a month over there. And you get that same opportunity, the same bonus content, etc. So check those out, see what works for you, and we would be forever grateful if you support the show. And of course, let people know that you listen to us. Share links to our episodes. Talk about it at your local Sherlockian Society meeting. Give us a rating or review on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you happen to listen to us. It'll help other Sherlockians learn about the same kinds of fascinating things that you're learning about. Well, we find ourselves in the beginning stages of the biography of Sherlock Holmes by William S. Baring-Gould. I don't think we've ever talked about this book before on the show.
No, I don't think so either.
Huh.
Not at all. And it's really high time. Baring-Gould, of course, is best known for being the author of the 1962 annotated Sherlock Holmes.
67.
I'm sorry, 62, right, was the biography of Holmes,
Yes.
and 67 was his annotated Sherlock Holmes. And among other things, he was a member of the Baker Street Irregulars. He was an executive at Time Incorporated. And one of the reasons why I was particularly interested in looking at this chapter from his book is because, we frequently we've just had 221 BCon. And this whole subject of fan fiction and imagination around the characters of Sherlock Holmes and that sort of enthusiasm tends to be viewed as very much sort of a popular culture kind of thing. But here's Bill Baring-Gould engaged in his biography of Sherlock Holmes, which is certainly, since we know virtually nothing about Holmes's background from Watson's records, certainly a work of imagination. And it points out, what is yet to be explored about these characters' relationships and their abilities and so on. And so we have Baring-Gould's On Stage and Off in England and America, 1879 to 1881.
It's a fascinating time period because it's not one that is covered by the canon. This is before we meet Sherlock Holmes, just the very 2 years leading up to Watson's fateful throw-in with Holmes via Stamford. And we find ourselves in London in the late 1870s, and Baring-Gould says it's a ridiculously inexpensive place to live, which that kind of surprised me a little bit since he and Watson seemed to be going in for rooms together on a purely pecuniary basis. But Holmes probably didn't have the allowance that he had anticipated or thought he deserved. And Baring-Gould says, so alarming that the state of his finances become that he soon realized, like Watson 2 years later, that he either must leave or choose to alter his living habits. And here Baring-Gould invents a run-in, a meeting between Sherlock Holmes and none other than Langdale Pike, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, but it also is an area where Bill Baring-Gould goes off the rails a little bit, as you will see in the next sentence here. He writes, on the very day that he'd come to his conclusion, and he's referring to the conclusion that Holmes needed more money, Holmes is walking through Piccadilly Circus when there came a tap on his shoulder. And he turns around, says Bill, he recognized one who had been an undergraduate in Holmes' own college at Cambridge.
Uh-oh.
And Holmes exclaims, Lord Peter. Well now, first of all, Lord Peter Wimsey is a Balliol man who went to Oxford.
Right.
But skipping over that.
Well, there's other Lord Peters out there, I'm sure.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Maybe it's a different Lord Peter. I never thought of that. That's clever. Well, Lord Peter goes on to say, oh, please, no title, said the strange, languid young man who'd stopped him. I prefer to be known these days by my professional name, Langdale Pike.
Professional name? Langdale Pike.
Yes, Langdale Pike, he says, the actor. And Holmes bursts out laughing. Like Reginald Musgrave, Lord Peter was a scion of one of the oldest families in the kingdom. Now here, Bill Baring-Gould has a footnote that tells you, by the way, the Langdale Pikes are in fact 2 hills in Westmoreland overlooking Wordsworth Grasmere. It's obvious that Lord Peter was a North Countryman, and probable that Holmes had made friends with him at Cambridge. Cambridge, poor, I'm glad Nick Utekin is not with us to hear that.
Yeah.
At Cambridge for this reason. So there's Baring-Gould's footnote. But
That's great. I caught some Langdale pike on a holiday, I thought.
I get them at Stop and Shop. Yeah, it's pretty good. Just the fillets, though. And he goes on to say, Langdale Pike says, my father has disinherited me for it.
Uh-oh.
Well, says Holmes, not that it means as much, but I'm in the next thing to being disinherited myself.
And
then, of course,
here Langdale Pike invites Holmes to lunch with him at his club, and they go to Langdale Pike's St. James's Street Club. And another footnote from Baring-Gould, he says, although most theatrical people, of course, belong to the Garrick Club, which is not in St. James's Street, Langdale Pike in his true identity would, of course, be a member of a club like Boodle's, White's, or Brooks's. Now, if you recall, we did a discussion on Watson's Club back in episode 130. So there's an opportunity to go back and take a listen to episode 130 about clubs. So they head off to lunch, and Langdale Pike says, I've got a brilliant idea. You're tall enough, Holmes. You have a voice that could carry over the footlights. There's a small part open in Hamlet. We mostly do Shakespeare. Why don't you come round to the theater and read for it? Old Sasanoff's not a bad part as actor-managers go. By the way, can you act at all? And Holmes professes ignorance at this point, says, well, I really don't know. I haven't tried it yet.
Bum, bum, bum.
And so Holmes gets his own stage name, which will come up later in the Sherlock Holmes canon, William Escott. And it's derived from what Baring-Gould says are his Christian names, William S. for Sherlock, William S. Scott. Now, as someone whose full name is William Scott Monty, I am fully behind this theory.
Well, you must be a distant cousin.
I like to think so.
Yeah. Critics are generally agreed, says Baring-Gould, that William Escott made an amazing success as an actor, partly due to Holmes' impressive figure and to his face. The high forehead set off by strongly marked and exceedingly flexible eyebrows, the large, positive nose, the narrow, sensitive lips, the strong, thin jaw, the keen and piercing gray eyes, and to crown it all, the thick, slightly wavy, dark brown hair, which Holmes, as an actor, wore rather long. This is clearly before Sidney Paget began to sketch in his receding hairline.
Well,
and Holmes...
This is very clearly the Frederick Dorr Steele Sherlock Holmes before he got a haircut. This is William Gillette.
Right. Oh, it's Freya. Well, Freddie was ahead of his time in so many ways. Yeah. Holmes also became a devout student of the theater, reading books on stage history and on acting technique, and he experimented then with makeup and costumes. He took a deep and intellectual interest in the problems of stage lighting and constructing sets. It was all no challenge for the indefatigable Sherlock Holmes, but Holmes was not very popular with his fellow players, not even Langdale Pike. It would be easy to attribute this to their jealousy and his meteoric rise in a profession which many of them had worked at for years. But the easy explanation is not the whole one. And at this point, Baring-Gould takes us back to Michael Sasanoff. Now, I have to tell you two things about Michael Sasanoff, which is one of the things that attracted me to this story. First of all, there's a footnote here that Baring-Gould puts in, referring to 70 Years a Showman, published, he says, in London by Stoddard and Houghton in 1923. I can also tell you that in 1974, Michael Harrison wrote a booklet called The Theatrical Mr. Holmes, which expounds on this idea that Holmes worked for Michael Sassonoff. I can't find any record of Michael Sassonoff ever existing, except a Michael Sassonoff who wrote cartoons for Warner Brothers in the 1940s. He was a writer for things like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. And
Oh, maybe it was his son.
Oh, maybe it was,
grandson.
but I can't find any record of Michael Sassonoff.
Well, what about his own biography? His
I
own
can't
memoir?
find any record of that either.
Really?
Not on ABE Books. No, it's nothing.
Wow.
Which doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it must be one of the few facts that has escaped. If it exists, it's one of the few facts that has escaped the internet.
He was world famous in Poland.
Thank you, Mel Brooks. Yes. So much absorbed with Sherlock Holmes and his own achievements, he was unable or unwilling to appreciate the achievements of others.
Well, Holmes, again, this is Baring-Gould claiming this. Holmes's first role, at least his first important role, was Cassius in Julius Caesar. And old quote-unquote Sassonoff was only 48 at the time, turned his eyes westward to that land of opportunity, America. And it wasn't uncommon in those days for European actors and actresses to be warmly welcomed on the shores of America, particularly in New York and Boston. And Adelaide Ristori was an Italian actress. She made a great hit in Medea in 1866. And then Lillian Adelaide Nelson made no fewer than 4 successful American tours between 1872 and 79. Tommaso Salvini, who also enjoyed advantage of early training in Ristori's company, came to the U.S. in 1873 and was in Othello. But, and I love this side note, not in the least handicapped by the fact that he had to play the role in Italian while all his fellow actors replied in English. That must have been some production. Mm-hmm. So in New York, we get ourselves to New York. Of course, Sarah Bernhardt made her first appearance in America in 1880. Booth's theater was blocked with people hours before the performance on that opening night. Now, Bert, you've been a member of the Players in New York. What was Booth's theater? Who is Booth, and what is his theater?
Edwin Booth was the greatest American Shakespearean actor in the late 19th century, and his theater was on 23rd Street in Manhattan and is long gone. But he was the son of Junius Brutus Booth, an actor who came over from England and became very popular in the West performing Shakespeare. And he was also the brother of John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of Abraham Lincoln. And he endowed, with some money he made in the late 1870s and 80s, the Players Club, which is still on Gramercy Park, and died in the club. He lived in the club his last 3-4 years and died there. Sarah Bernhardt visited the Players Club, the story goes, and was stuck for a time in the elevator. Booth had been shot by someone when he returned to the stage because of his connection to his unfortunate brother, and was partly infirm for the last years of his life. And Sarah Bernhardt made an appearance at the all-male Players Club and was stuck in the elevator there. And to this day, they call that the Sarah Bernhardt room. It's about the size of a phone booth. It's a little elevator that gets you in from the first floor up to the top of the building. Also, Salvini was a mate of Edwin Booth's. He was a friend, and Booth had in his rooms an autographed photo, and it's still there at the Players by Tommaso Salvini.
Excellent. So Holmes and the rest of his company sailed for the United States in late November 1879 on the Empress Queen and landed 10 days later in New York. And Sassonoff chose Twelfth Night, Twelfth Night, as his first American production. That, of course, is what Christopher Morley would have us believe was Sherlock Holmes's favorite Shakespearean play, because he quoted it twice. But it's been said, according to Baring-Gould, that Holmes's Malvolio offered the most adequate presentation of that character that America had ever seen up to this time. And as a footnote, other roles in which Holmes scored notably were Mephistopheles and Faust, Shylock and the Merchant of Venice, Mercutio and Romeo and Juliet, where his swordsmanship was a tremendous asset, and most memorably as Macbeth. The Twelfth Night was always Holmes's favorite. So the run in New York was a long one, and the troupe went on to give 128 performances in many of America's principal cities.
Now, you may be sitting around and saying to yourself, well, gee, this is all pretty interesting about the theater and Holmes as an actor. But boy, aren't we supposed to be talking about Sherlock Holmes? Well, now Bill Baring-Gould really gets through his knowledge of the canon and aligns it with this story. Because what he then says is, in America, theater, then as today, now he's writing in 1962, there were invariably 2 weekly afternoon performances, one on Saturday, he says, the other on Wednesday. But on the 5 other days of the week, Holmes, who never needed more than a few hours of sleep, was left to his own devices, and he had an intense interest in criminal activity in the States. So in New York, he meets Wilson Hargreave, who was later to become important in the New York City Police Department. And that, of course, refers to the dancing men. And Hargreave, says Bill, was at that time, like Holmes, a private agent, currently engrossed in the case of Vanderbilt and the Yeggman, one of the untold cases that Watson refers to in Sussex Vampire. It was Holmes who pointed out to him, the fact that led to the solution. And in Philadelphia, a shotgun brought as a prop for the play the company was performing gave Holmes the opportunity to observe the mark of the Pennsylvania Small Arms Company, which Watson, of course, refers to in the Valley of Fear. And in Baltimore, Holmes acquires a taste for oysters. And then, while he's there, solves the mystery of a supposed locked room by noting the depth to which the parsley had sunk into the butter, which, of course, is a reference to the dreadful business of the Abernethy family, which was Holmes remembered in the Six Napoleons. And then in Chicago, Holmes makes his first acquaintance with organized gangsterism. In The Dancing Men, he says, my knowledge of the crooks of Chicago. So that's where he acquired that.
Well, that's a nice catch-all.
Yeah.
We should note, because you did, as you were going through those many unpublished cases there, you mentioned Yeggman. And in our introductions, and I don't know if folks are aware of this, Trifles, we have, I think, 16 different introductions we've prepared for our show. That minute-long introduction with the music and whatnot. And we managed to squeeze in all of the Sherlock Holmes stories, as we mentioned there, and then pull out some things that we thought might be interesting to investigate. And one of the things we mention in there is Yeggman, which is what you mentioned in reading Baring-Gould's piece here. We did a couple of episodes related to jobs, occupations, etc. Episode 69, Occupations in the Canon, Part 1, and episode 124, Odd Jobs. And we mentioned Yeggman in both of those. So if you're interested in learning more about what a Yeggman is, go check out those episodes.
Today, of course, the Yeggman is the agent of Professor Moriarty, who has made it possible to buy eggs for only $15 a dozen in the United States. So he's a lot to answer for.
You don't want to know that guy. I am the walrus.
Well, Baring-Gould goes on and says the troupe even crossed the great western plains. And that was a time where Holmes's train was once halted by a great migration of buffalo across the tracks, and it was a sight that Holmes could never forget. And that's why he says in Study in Scarlet to Watson, if a herd of buffaloes had passed along, there could not have been a greater mess. So there you are. Baring-Gould has packed all of that in there.
Buffaloes, oysters. I mean, this is all good eating territory.
Yeah.
Well, so the only parts that Holmes did not travel to between 1879 and 1980 were the South and the Southwest. And Holmes, despite having an American encyclopedia on his mantle later, or bookshelf in Baker Street, Holmes didn't know which state was the Lone Star State. I don't know if you remember that in the Five Orange Pips. But everywhere the company went, they found enthusiastic audiences, packed houses, and Holmes, of course, would have had a very strong affection for the United States from then on. And later life, we know he praised American slang, he quoted Thoreau, showed his knowledge of the price of cocktails, among many other instances that might be mentioned, uttered his famous sentiment, "It is always a joy to meet an American, for I am one of those who believe that the folly of a monarch and the blundering of a minister in far-gone years will not prevent our children from being someday citizens of the same world-wide country under a flag which shall be quartering the Union Jack with the stars and stripes." And Holmes returned to England in the summer of 1880.
Well, he returns to the reading room of the British Museum and the laboratories at Bart's and learns more chemistry and goes back to his studies and invests his savings, such as they are, from his salary. And his reputation builds. And then, of course, in 1880, half a world away, John Watson, the army surgeon attached to the Berkshires, serving at the fatal Battle of Maiwand, was struck on the shoulder by a Jezail bullet. But his orderly Murray throws him across a pack horse and succeeds in bringing him safely to the British lines. And that's where Bill Baring-Gould leaves a story about Holmes the actor. And as Curtis Armstrong has observed, unfortunately, Bill Baring-Gould did not get far along in his discussion of Holmes the actor to state what Holmes really wanted to do, which, of course, was direct.
And that is no trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
You rogue, you! You would have made an actor, and a rare one. You had the proper workhouse cough. And those weak legs of yours, they're worth £10 each.